This is Alexa Linton, and you're listening to the Whole Horse Podcast. I'm coming to you from the Cowichan Valley on beautiful Vancouver Island in Canada, and I'm excited to be bringing amazing instructors from around the world to share their knowledge about all the ways that we can keep ourselves and our horses well and happy, and about some of the cutting-edge techniques, training, and different aspects that are coming into the horse industry and changing it from within. I'm so excited you're here, and I'm excited about the times that we live in and the shifts that are happening in the horse industry before our eyes. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. It's Alexa Linton here. Welcome to the Whole Horse Podcast. Today on the podcast, I have a favorite guest back again, Elisha Edwards. Welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me again. I love these. They're so fun.
They are so fun, and I always love chatting with you. And today we have a very specific topic that is it's a hot topic, I'm gonna say, in horses, right at this moment and probably has been for a while, something that's been coming to my attention more and more and more, and, yeah, that I'm seeing in the horses around me and my clients. So, yeah, really excited to chat with you today about equine metabolic, syndrome and health issues and just really dive into that. So thank you for being willing to do that with me today.
Yes, no problem.
Mm. So let's get started. I know you've got a little bit of a process that you go through with your work, Elisha. Um, yeah, can you share? I mean, first of all, maybe let's start with how you got into this type of work. You know, what kind of led you down this path to working with metabolic, and then we'll get into more of the nitty gritty about it.
Yeah, so I guess going all the way back, a lot of people know my mom, Marika Van Water, author of Healing Horses Their Way, and founder and formulator of Riva's Remedies. And so she had started this company many, many years ago, 20, 25 years ago. And in 2011, I stepped into the company to help her grow it and help with the horses. And I just felt strongly about doing good work for them. So many of them need help. And my background is in science in the pharmaceutical industry. And also, I have a long background in natural health, obviously. And so the two married pretty well together. And so when you start working one on one with horses and you see all the owners looking for different solutions, they're looking for new ways to help their horses, and one condition that comes up over and over and over again is metabolic syndrome. So many horses are struggling with it. It is very much a domestic problem, and one of the reasons, of course, that people are so concerned about it is that 90% of those laminitis cases are linked to sugar metabolism. And we'll talk more as the podcast evolves about the details of how that starts. But so laminitis is a really big concern for a lot of people. There's a lot of sore horses out there, and the underlying cause being sugar metabolism and metabolic conditions. So that's really what prompted me to take a closer look at putting some different information out there on how people can help their horses if they suspect they're metabolic, if they know they're metabolic, if they think they're too far gone because they're metabolic, whatever that case may be. There I have a certain process in place for them to implement things to help them. So that's kind of where we're at. So I just launched that little short course a couple months ago, and people are taking it. They're enjoying it. I tried to keep it really simple and easy to follow, and just incorporating as much as you can into your horse's life. And one of the toughest things I think too is that when you Google metabolic syndrome, whatever you're looking at, whether it's insulin resistance or Cushing's, you get a ton of information off the internet. And whenever you have topics where that happens, it gets more confusing for the owners because they don't know what to take for their horse or what's not going to work. So just some clear guidance, I think, is required in the industry.
Yeah, it can be that sense of having 100 opinions and just
Mhm.
having no clue where to get real clarity and real help. Yeah.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. Hmm. Now, I've noticed, Alicia, especially out here in BC, on the West Coast, not ideal conditions for horses typically. And I know for myself, being out and about in the horse world quite a bit down here, still practicing equine therapy. I'm seeing just the numbers of metabolic horses going up,
Yeah.
all the time. And I don't know if that's that I'm seeing it, or it's being diagnosed more, or is there something changing? What's going on there?
Yeah, so that's a good point to bring up. The cases are rising. It's an epidemic in the horse world. It's a domestic horse world problem. And despite all the information we have access to, right? You can just type into Google and the information is there, a lot of it. Not all of it is correct, but we have a lot of information. We know a lot about metabolic syndrome, and yet the numbers continue to rise. So why is that? I guess I don't really know. I can't speak for everyone else, but I know the horses that I work with, it is very, very rare that I don't see progress when they are bringing together the right combination of things to address the underlying cause.
Mm,
But yes, the environment certainly does make it more challenging, right? You got smaller areas, you've got green pasture, especially down where you are in sort of a rainforest, right? You're going to have lots of rain and yeah, so it is challenging, but there are certain strategies that you can definitely implement. And I think one area, which we'll talk about probably a little bit later, that I think doesn't get as much attention as it should, is using therapeutic nutrition to help them restore balance. And that's just something that's not talked about very often when you're looking for solutions.
mm, yeah, absolutely. Um, Me recently having taken on another horse, my mare Raven, it's been a very interesting thing for me because she's has early onset arthritis in the coffin joint itself. So I've
Okay.
become progressively more and more aware of keeping that joint happy and healthy, and not having any changes to the lamina.
Right. Yes.
Right. And she's, a bigger mare. She tends to kind of blow up on grass and things. So it's becoming more like in my face, I guess you could
Yeah.
say, at home, right? And also seeing in her, and I have many questions of curiosity, but one of the things I've been noticing in her, is these lines in her feet, these
Yes.
lines in her hooves. And so maybe that's something we can come to along the way, just for personal curiosity.
Yes, for sure.
Just massive stress lines, probably about, I'm looking at the growth of her foot maybe 9 months ago or so, as the foot grows out. So just, yeah, these are sort of questions that have started to percolate in me as a horse owner out here. And I'm sure there's other owners that are going, okay, like I'm seeing these little things changing. And I'm assuming for you, Alicia, that's where you want to kind of catch it,
Yes. So
in the little changes.
right. And so that is a very good point. So first of all, I think what I'd like to do is just clarify what
Yeah,
conditions are
let's do
under
that.
the umbrella of metabolic syndrome. And then I'll talk a little
Please.
bit about, what that looks like, how to recognize it. So equine metabolic syndrome is kind of an umbrella term that encompasses insulin resistance, Cushing syndrome, and there's another condition that I put underneath this umbrella inside the course, but is not often associated when you're Googling, and that is the PSSM horses. So that's polysaccharide
Mm,
storage myopathy. So that's also a sugar metabolism issue, but it's different than your insulin resistance and your Cushing's, but it is still a sugar metabolism problem. So I put them all under that umbrella inside the course. They're all worth talking about because it is such a widespread domestic problem, right? We have high sugar, lack of exercise, poor nutrition in a lot of cases, right? We're seeing nutritional deficiencies everywhere in our horses. So when we are talking about equine metabolic syndrome, we're talking about those three conditions.
mhm.
And for horse owners, I think a lot of their struggle is, okay, so where is my horse? How do I recognize if I
Yep.
should be worried, or if my horse is at risk, or, where is this going to take me? And so, of course, whenever we are dealing with domestic conditions that are chronic, like equine metabolic syndrome, I hear many or horse owners say, okay, well, he's, 15. He's always been healthy. This has never happened before. And now he's sore. I don't know where it came from. He all of a sudden started gaining weight. And what I can tell you for certain is that this condition didn't happen in 24 hours. There was a
Mhm.
process on a cellular level that led up to that moment. And so prevention is half the battle. Like, just putting all these things into practice, whether you actually see a clinical condition or have a diagnosis, is really, really critical in what's going to happen later, especially as they get older. So when they do get older and you start to see the progression of these conditions, you see a lot of signs that start to happen. If you have an easy keeper, and there's certain breeds that are just more prone, but if you have an easy keeper, they're hungry all the time, they're aggressive over their food. You look at their hooves and you start to see those
Mhm.
lines, the horizontal lines, and sometimes that can be associated with the trim. They can be pressure rings around there, but they can also be event rings from the inflammation from grass.
Mhm.
So you can see sort of the grass, no grass, grass, no grass, right? Moving down
Mhm.
their foot.
Totally.
So yeah, and then the crested necks, the big barrels, there's a certain, when you work with enough of metabolic horses, there's a certain look that they have, right? You can kind of pick them out. You just kind of know they might be struggling with a lot of fatigue is one thing that you'll see a lot with insulin resistance, even pre-insulin resistance. And that's just, a combination of imbalanced hormones and unhealthy sugar metabolism, high insulin, high blood sugar, and then the blood sugar crashes. So it's a lot more complicated than what we have time today for. But when you see any of those signs, it's a sign that we have an imbalance happening here, and it's probably related to sugar digestion.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and it's sort of ringing a lot of bells for me there as far as horses that I've seen and symptoms that I've seen and things like that. So yeah, can you just I know you have a four-step process that you work with, or where do you go with you start to see some of these symptoms?
Yeah.
What
So
are the next places? Yeah.
So, yeah, and I guess my approach is not going to be the same as the allopathic approach.
Yep.
So my approach is 100% holistic. So because these conditions are caused by diet, lifestyle, environment, that's the approach we take to resolve it, right? So, whereas more of the allopathic method is, first we need a diagnosis to do anything about it, and if we don't get the diagnosis, it's okay. And half the time, I know I've seen so many horses that they show all the signs, and they're just sort of it's waiting to happen, and yet the blood tests still come back negative.
Yep.
So blood tests don't really hold a lot of weight with me. It's not what I do. I don't really pay too much attention to that, although it's, if there is an affirmative diagnosis, then for sure, like, okay, we need to get on this, and you just start implementing the same things. It doesn't really change my approach. So that's sort of the difference. So when we're talking about a holistic approach to metabolic syndrome, we are talking about using diet, we're talking about using stress management, we're talking about using nutrition, so therapeutic nutrition to restore balance to the hormones, the mind, the digestive system, and we're talking about using natural remedies. So herbs and homeopathy can be so beneficial for a lot of these
Mhm.
cases, to get them sort of just to stimulate their systems, to detoxify their systems. So we use a lot of that as well. So those are sort of the four aspects that I am implementing in sequence, whenever I see a metabolic horse. So if I just recognize that we have a metabolic condition, it's just the same approach that applies. You just have to work through the same steps and implement the same things. And it's the very rare case that you won't get benefit. or that you
Mm.
won't get progress.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so the first sort of, and I interchange these because they're both really important, but the first step, and I think this is something that people really need to pay attention to if you suspect your horse is insulin resistant or Cushing's, is stress levels. Stress levels wreak havoc on the body. It is really hard for a horse to heal under stress. And they have a very important hormone called cortisol. And once it rises, we want cortisol to rise. It's a good thing when they're in fight or flight. It prepares the body
Mhm.
to survive. So it evacuates the organs, it increases blood pressure. It just helps them survive in where there's threats. But in long term situations, cortisol is very bad, especially for the metabolic horse, because it will start breaking down tissues for energy. It will end up causing a lot of inflammation, even though it's a natural anti-inflammatory. So you really have to watch the cortisol levels. And once that hormone increases, it also throws the rest of the endocrine system out of balance as well. So it's a pretty major player, especially in cases of Cushing's syndrome.
Mm.
And that starts with their environment. You have to start with their environment and make sure that you're doing everything that you can to help them reduce their stress levels. And that includes herd dynamics and, where they are.
Mhm.
Don't stall or confine a metabolic horse, especially giving them appropriate exercise, making sure they have friends. All of that makes a really big difference. And even things you might not think stress them out. And I always tell owners this and my students as well. Like, it's not what you think is stressing them out; it is what they think. So you have to really keep this in mind. If all they really need is 20 minutes a day of movement to reduce their stress levels, then that's what they need, right? Or 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But movement is really, really crucial for them as well. So that's sort of the first step we work through, is just finding strategies that just bring down those cortisol levels. And of course, the challenge with that is everybody has different setups, right? You have horses that might be on a quarter section, and the challenge is, how do I bring him in when he's by himself? But because he can't be on grass. And then you have other situations where they have very small paddocks, and it's hard to do slow feeders, or it's hard to get them eating all the time, and it's hard to get them moving. So there's different setups, but inside the course, I really try and give you as many tips as I can to just implement some things easily, no matter what setup that you have. And then the second thing that we want to address is diet. And
Mhm.
diet's pretty major when we're talking about metabolic syndrome. And my mom has always said this: food rules. Like, if you're going to approach any sort of condition, whether it's acute or chronic, food always rules, right? Because that's the primary thing that they're getting all of their nutrients from. It's what makes their bodies healthy. It's what gives them the tools they need to be healthy. So it starts with diet, and of course, with metabolic conditions, it's sugar toxicity. Sugar toxicity and stress are the two major causes there. So, with sugar toxicity, of course, we're worried about pasture. Um,
Mhm.
every horse has different tolerance levels for pasture. And if you have a really metabolic horse, they just can't be on pasture for a little
Yeah.
while. And hay, sugar in hay is important. What kind of grain are they getting? Is there any hidden sugar in there? Because they'll find it if they can.
Mhm.
And one thing I include as part of the diet is, it's not just about reducing sugar, but it's also about reducing toxicity from other things. And so when you see a lot of the metabolic friendly commercial feeds out there, often when they reduce sugar, they have to increase something else, right? For the caloric load. And so often you'll see those feeds really high in fat or really high in protein.
Mhm.
And that can also be toxic to an unwell horse. So you really want to make sure that everything you're putting in their feed program is contributing to wellness and balance. And with horses, that's fiber, it's plants, it's bioavailable nutrition. They don't do well on high fat diets, they don't do well on high protein diets, and they don't do well on high sugar diets. So you really have to balance that out. And it can vary from horse to horse. Some horses have a higher tolerance for certain things than others. But that's definitely something to be aware of. Like, just because you're pulling out sugar, don't start pouring oil into their feed dish. Um,
Yes.
And, of course, part of the diet, the outcome or the goal that we all want is to regulate blood sugar. We really that's the goal here. We want to make sure that whatever we're doing for them with their environment and their diet, their blood sugar isn't spiking and dropping because it's the high blood sugar and high insulin that causes so much inflammation in the body. And with many of these horses, and Alexa, you might have some stories to tell us about this, but you will see a lot of general inflammation in
Oh, yeah.
these horses.
And I was gonna say, when you palpate these horses, you know there's, they're sore, or there's a feeling to their tissue, that's quite, what's the word? It's like a squishiness that shouldn't be there, or a
Yeah.
like a
Yes.
swelling,
Yes.
like they're edemic almost
Yes, they
in their
are.
tissues.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, so these horses have a lot of body soreness and inflammation, and fluid retention
Yeah.
because carbohydrate, the byproduct of carbohydrate metabolism is water, right? So where there's a carbohydrate molecule, there's four water molecules. And so that is a big deal. You'll see horses with sheath swelling and swelling of the udders and edema in the lower extremities is very common. Now, even if you don't have a insulin resistant horse or a Cushing's horse or you don't have any diagnosis, if you are seeing that sort of swelling, get on it, right?
Yeah.
Because the body's not able to keep up. It's not regulating the fluids appropriately. And that's carbohydrate metabolism. It's lack of exercise and too much sugar. So that's something you definitely want to be aware of. And then you get those horses where they're just sore. And so, especially if they're older horses, owners tend to think, well, he's older. Yeah, he might have a little bit of laminitis, but he's got arthritis too because they just look sore in their shoulders and
Mhm.
general body soreness. And actually, when you get these horses on a good metabolic program, often the arthritis quote unquote disappears because it's
Yep.
not actually arthritis, it's just inflammation. It's inflammation around the joints and the muscles, and it's just, they're stiff, right? Because it's just, yeah. Yeah, so
Mm.
that is it's always something to be aware of with horses is that inflammation, and the lamina, of course, is not excluded from that picture. Where if the other tissues are inflamed, the lamina is at high risk. So even if your horse is not laminitic, but they're metabolic and body sore, it's time to get on it because the lamina is a specialized tissue that you really don't want to get inflamed.
Yeah, not a good idea.
Yeah,
Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. That is super helpful, and I know that, I work on a lot of older horses, um, and, yeah, and this is something, I think it can be, sort of a little bit of a slippery slope, it feels like, with these kind of horses where their systems, are slowing down maybe a little bit, and things are, um, working a little harder to do the same job, and, yeah, so
for
that's
sure.
very, very helpful.
And
Mhm.
with excess toxicity, that actually slows metabolism down too.
Yep.
So, there's metabolic syndrome, but there's also a lot of other sort of conditions, I'm going to say, that might get wrapped into that too. Things can get pretty complicated, especially as they get older. And so, if they have a high toxic load, let's say they've got some, toxic heavy metals or they're high in iron or
Mhm.
something like that, or they're just have diets that have been really out of balance, like high sugar, high fat. There's a lot of toxicity in the body, and that includes viruses and bacteria and all of that too. It will slow down metabolism because the body has to metabolize a lot of things they wouldn't normally have to deal with. So that's important to know too. The other thing that gets really overlooked sometimes, but also has a very strong connection to metabolic conditions is poor immunity. And in my
Mm.
program, Healing Horses Their Way, I think the course has represented 100 to 200 horses now over two enrollments, and so everybody gets to take a horse through the program, and I get to see all those symptoms that we start out with, like where the horses start. And out of all the metabolic horses, which was a good proportion of them, I would say it's about 70% of them have some sign of poor immunity. Now, that
Mhm.
might mean skin problems, respiratory allergies. They just get runny noses or sort of, they're just weaker. You see those horses that just are generally weaker. So, um, the immune system has a very strong correlation to metabolic conditions as well.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and I can see how my brain is just churning here, my older mare Diva has I've often had boarding horses come and stay, and they live in a herd. And the last couple of times it's been stressful on her in very varying ways. Um, and I noticed during those times the immune crash.
Mhm.
So, like the runny nose, the runny eyes, the swelling, the tendency for lymphatic swelling, under the mandible, things like that. And it's really interesting to start to put together the pieces of the around that of like those high cortisol levels kind of lending themselves to this change in the immune system, change in the metabolism as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think once you know what you're seeing and why you're
Yep.
seeing it, it's kind of a game changer. I know a lot of my students, once they finish the program, they're like just like, "Oh my God, I had no idea what," because I think we normalize a lot of things.
I was gonna say a lot of it is like, "Oh, well, that's just, it's just what a runny
Yeah.
eye or what," but to sort of see it as, yeah, that is a piece of it,
There's
right?
a reason. There's
Yeah.
always a reason when you have unwellness or, disease, whether it's in horses or anyone else, there's always a reason behind it, and I always tell my students too, like, Mother Nature is always smarter than we are. She just is. She knows what to do and how to do it, and she is pro-life. She wants the species to survive, and so when you're seeing signs or symptoms, all you're really seeing is an expression of the body that says, we're doing our best here, but we're falling apart, and so all of those things are just an attempt to restore balance. So when you keep that in mind and you're seeing your horse and the health imbalances, just know there's a reason behind it,
Mhm.
and where there's a reason, once you identify it, there's often a solution or at least some help to make them feel better.
Well, yeah, and I have noticed with Diva, since those environmental factors have shifted, she doesn't have those same symptoms anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing, and horses are so emotional,
Yep.
right? They're
Oh,
so
yeah.
dramatic and emotional, and
Yes.
everything matters to them. So, as far as their environment and living conditions and who they're with and what they're all doing, like, they really care about everything around them, and so,
Yep.
they really makes a drastic effect, and I think that's why so often you'll see horses healthy, 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 and then there's just some sort of trigger, right? There's a stressful
Yep.
event, a loss, loss of a herd mate, best friend, a move, something like that that triggers an event, and then all of a sudden they're thrown into an acute laminitic episode. Now, it might be easy to say, well, yeah, okay, so there was a stressful event that caused the laminitis, but actually all of that inflammation was there already. It's
Mm.
just that stressful event tip them over the edge, and
Right.
I see that all the time as well with
Mm.
horses.
Mm. Yeah, like the straw that broke the camel's back, so to
Yeah,
speak.
and it's just one stressful event, and that usually does it, and then all of a sudden, all the signs that are, sort of under the surface come to the surface, and now
Mm.
now it's a clinical problem that you can see, touch, and feel.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to track back a little bit around the diet stuff because I have some, personal curiosities. So one of the things you talked about was high iron levels, and I think this is something that a lot of people deal with, especially if they've got a well on property or, and they're needing to use that water. Or I know that a lot of, vitamin minerals actually having included iron, which is sometimes more than the body needs. So, can you talk a little bit about the impact of high iron and maybe some of the ways you work with that?
Yeah, so I know it's a big problem in the industry, and it's a topic I kinda, um proceed with caution about
Yeah.
because there's very little science to be really backing up a lot of claims. But what I can say is, yes, of course, it's a concern. Iron. The concern is that if you have wells high in iron and or diets high in iron, soils high in iron, that it precipitates. in the liver. Typically, that's what you see with horses. So
Yep.
that can cause a whole host of problems. Um, but it's not easy to change your well water or
No.
put a new system in or change your soil. So we have to find other ways of metabolizing that iron. And you can use different vitamins and minerals to help you do that, mostly minerals. You can, to increase the metabolism of iron. And so all of what I'm talking about as far as an approach to metabolic syndrome really matter. You should always just start with that sort of framework, because the healthier the body is, the lower the toxic load, the more nutrition the body has, the better able it will be to metabolize things that aren't beneficial for the body. So, a lot of these, and through hair analysis, so we do a lot of hair analysis. And my mom has said, the 90% of the horses high in iron are also high in aluminum. So it's not just about iron we're talking about. There's a lot of sources of toxicity in their environment, but you can't change their environment. So we have to find new ways of making them healthier so that they're able to eliminate it on their own. Now, one of the things that we're noticing also is that supplementing with an organic form of iron is actually bringing those levels down. No, we've worked with thousands of horses using organic iron, and I've seen iron help with respiratory problems like chronic respiratory
Yep.
problems, energy levels, chronic infections. It's there's a lot of horses that are low in healthy iron, and what we started noticing was the healthy iron started to lower the inorganic iron. So there are two different types of iron. One's bioavailable, one is not. And the science doesn't exist to really be able to explain that, other than perhaps the organic iron is helping to displace the inorganic. I
Wow.
hope I said that right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's not a simple topic. It's very, very complex. It's too much for a podcast, but
Yep.
there's a lot of other minerals that are responsible for the metabolism of iron too. And so if your horse is deficient in any of those minerals, for example, it can have a really big effect on how they metabolize it. So
Mm,
a few of those minerals are calcium, selenium, copper is another one that's
yep,
involved
I've
in
heard
iron
that one.
metabolism as well. So
Mhm.
those are all things. If you suspect that your horse is high in iron, my suggestion would be to do a hair analysis so you can actually see it right on the page, right? And then
Wow.
with that hair analysis, if you do it through Riva's Remedies, and my mom does all of those reports, then you will be able to see exactly what to do, right? You'll have a program put together for
Yep.
you specifically to lower those for that horse, because it's not just looking at high iron, it's looking at all the other sources of toxicity
Yep.
as well as depleted nutrients too.
Hmm. Okay, that's awesome. And I
That
think
was a
that's
lot, I know.
yeah, no, it's so good because I know for myself, I get into this situation as a horse steward where I go, "Oh my god, I don't know what to do," and it feels so complicated.
Hmm.
And so it's so nice to know that there's a process like hair analysis. And then I also want to chat here, and I know that it's a little bit off topic and probably its whole own podcast, but one of the things that I've been finding myself sort of like I need to do this, but I haven't done it, but I need to do this is hay testing.
Oh yeah.
So because I have a barn full of first cut hay and I'm kind
Yes.
of like, "Oh god, it's probably terrible." It's kind of that thing of like I just don't want to know, but once you know, it's at least helpful for the future. So
Yes.
is there any way to kind of dip a toe into this whole like hay testing business without, going off on a complete tangent here?
Yeah, I so not always when I'm working. If I'm doing a consultation for a metabolic course, or I'm teaching, a group of students that want to learn how to help a metabolic course, it's not a perfect world out there. Sometimes we don't have access to hay analysis at all. It's just not possible to get it. And sometimes, even if you do have it, there's nothing you can do about the hay, right? It is what it is. And like you say, you've got a barn full of hay, and what are you going to do now? So not in all cases do I request one, because especially if you have a horse that has a lot of room for improvement. So whether that's changing their environment to lower stress or improving their diet or using some nutritional therapy or adding some natural remedies to help mitigate the high sugar hay. And I've still been able to get recoveries just from doing that,
Yep.
without really saying, okay, you gotta clean out your hay, clay barn, like that's it. And in some cases, they're so sensitive and so chronic that it does matter. And when you have everything else in place and you're just not getting where you need to be, then, the hay makes up 80% of their diet. So, yes, it's important because they get a lot of their sugar from that. So, do your hay analysis if you can. I think it's just beneficial to do that. And there are certain strategies that will help you lower sugar. You have to work with your local, seeding company or agriculture company to know what you can do with seed. But cutting at night is one way to, cutting when sugars are the
Mm,
lowest will help. So it can help you implement some practices that may help lower your hay as well, lower the sugar in your hay. But typically with metabolic courses, we want to see the non-structural carbohydrates because that's what we're worried about with metabolic syndrome. It's the NSCs, and that's the type of sugar that absorbs very quickly across the intestinal membrane and the small intestine, and that's what causes the insulin response. So that's the number we really want to pay attention to, and that number should be less than 12%. If you have a really metabolic horse, you can go less than 10, but you don't want it to go too low either because horses still need some sugar in their diet.
mhm.
They need it for bodily processes. They need to have that there. So, but less than 12% is what I like to see. Now, if your horse is very active, that number can be higher. And if they're not metabolic, if they've
Yep,
got sort of a thoroughbred, just don't get metabolic syndrome, for example.
yep,
I've just never had one.
yep.
So, they can tolerate more sugar and sometimes they need it just because they're hard keepers and it's hard to keep weight on them. But so yeah, that's kind of what we're looking for there. You don't want your hay to be too coarse either. Meaning the fiber is really, really high because then the nutritional value drops. So they have to eat a lot of it to get the same nutrition. Protein levels you have to watch, and it's a little bit of a trade-off. The higher the sugar, the lower the protein, higher the protein, lower the sugar. So, especially with metabolic horses, we don't want that protein number to be super high. It should be around 10% is nice, 10 to 12% at the
Mhm,
most.
mhm.
But sometimes it is a trade-off, low sugar is higher in protein, and so that we just have to work with that. But yeah, so that's sort of what my guidelines are, the basic ones anyways, for metabolic hay.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm kind of one of those, I know it doesn't seem like it, but I'm a bit of like that horse person that's like, I think I get, to this like, oh my God, am I being terrible? And I kind of do like I ostrich a little bit. And I think probably there's some listeners that can relate to that as
Oh,
well.
yeah,
Like
for sure.
the guilt of like, oh my God, like it's just easier
You
not
just
to
don't wanna
know.
know, and there's a
Right.
lot of things in our lives, I think we all do that, it's just like, I'm just happy in ignorance, right? I just
Right.
yeah, it's just better not to know, and I think,
Completely.
that whenever you start your journey, especially with your horses, I think there's a lot of that, right, that goes on, like, "Oh, if
Yeah.
only I had known, maybe it's better not to know." But at the end of the day, it's always better to know, right? Because then
Yes.
you're prepared, and then you can practice prevention, it's just better for everybody.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's so helpful. Okay, so we've moved, through the diet, how important that is. And I know that we do not have time to dive into this more, but for those of you that are interested more in that, I think like definitely look at Alicia's course because I think I'm
Yeah.
going to be as well.
And
Um,
I do go into detail,
yeah,
in the course, on
great.
the hay analysis, and I have a webinar running right now, and it runs every day, and, I have a bonus if you sign up, within the hour, so and that bonus is the numbers on hay. So it's a complete guide to
Oh,
interpreting your hay
perfect.
analysis and also all of the, recommended levels of all the macronutrients. So if you're interested in that, you can take a look at that. But then we
Fantastic.
haven't got to nutrients yet, and
I
that
know.
actually happens to be one of my favorite parts.
Let's get in there. Let's do it.
Yeah,
Yes.
so and it's probably the one of the hardest. So if you're a horse owner and you think you have a metabolic horse on your hands or even at risk for metabolic syndrome, but you haven't really dove into a lot of information and you're just not really sure what's going to work or what's not going to work, this step can be, you have decisions to make when you start getting into, okay, what nutrients can I use to help them balance themselves out? And inside the course, I make that as easy as I can for you. Here's the profiles of every nutrient. Now pick the ones you see in your horse. I try to do that as much as I can. But why are nutrients such a problem for metabolic syndrome? Because there's a lot of nutrient deficiencies out there. And if you have a horse with a lot of nutrient deficiencies, and I see this happen all the time, Alexa, and maybe I don't know if you've run into this at all, but you have owners that are doing all the things, right? They're doing all the environmental things, and they are really managing stress, and they are got them on a good diet, and they've got the low sugar hay, and they're not getting anywhere. Have you had that? Have you heard that?
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
so it happens more often than not. And so for that reason, then it gets spread around like there's nothing you can do about metabolic syndrome. There's nothing you can do about it. It's just going to be there and you just have to, manage it with medication. And nothing could be further from the truth because we're not using nutrition to its maximum potential in a lot of these cases. So we know as a general industry that there's a lot of reasons for nutrient deficiencies, depleted feed supplies, poor feeding practices. So we talked about, doing high fat, high protein in place of high sugar. Um, there's a lot of chemical toxicity, so we touched on that with high iron, but it doesn't just come from there, right? It comes from their dewormers and their
Yep.
vaccinations, especially for vaccinating every year, and illness. So sick horses have higher requirements. Older horses have higher requirements for nutrients. So if you're missing, and essentially this is malnutrition, if they're missing a lot of nutrition, how are they going to maintain a healthy metabolism? How are they going to digest the best that they can and
Mm.
get all the nutrients they can out of their food? How are they supposed to keep their hormones balanced when they just don't have the tools to do that? So, this is where nutrients become very, very important. And it can control metabolism too. So, one nutrient that comes up a lot for metabolic conditions is selenium. A
Mhm.
lot of horses are deficient, a lot of soils are deficient in selenium. And so that's one nutrient that comes up a lot because without selenium, your thyroid is going to have a really hard time maintaining a healthy metabolism.
Mhm.
And so if you find yourself in situations where you're doing all the right things with the food and the lifestyle, but you just can't seem to get it further, then I would suggest just taking my course and just picking out some key nutrients that match up with your horse, and just get them started.
Mm.
Um, Horses on medications also,
Yep.
especially if you have metabolic horses on medication to manage it, or if you have a laminitic horse that's, had a lot of painkillers, lots of anti-inflammatories or
Yep.
NSAIDs, and that's something you want to be mindful of because medications do deplete nutrients. They deplete them by competing for absorption. Right? They have
Yep.
affinities for certain receptors and they just bind and block nutrients from absorbing. And the body also requires certain nutrients for metabolizing the medications, right? That's the
Mm.
biochemical pathway. So,
Mhm.
those are all really good reasons to use specific nutrients in specific dosages. So, whenever I'm working on a metabolic course, I really try and stay away from the multivitamin mineral mixes. If
I
I'm
was gonna ask about
Yeah,
that.
and yeah, and this doesn't have to be forever. I'm not saying it's not good to have a good foundation. We wanna
Yep.
make sure that they've got the nutrients they need for sure. But what I am saying is it's often not enough. They put
Yep.
so many things in there too, like, are they even absorbing any of it? Especially if their digestive system is not working on all cylinders, or, they've got other compounding factors going on. I mean, they might not be using any of the nutrients in there. So when we're customizing programs, we want to be very specific with the nutrients we use, the type of nutrients we use, and the dosage that we use, so that we're getting as maximum benefit as we can. Is basically the idea there, and being specific. So if you want to support digestion, use this nutrient. If you want to, support the thyroid and pituitary, use this nutrient. And so we really can do a lot with therapeutic nutrition in that sense.
Mm. Mhm. Oh my gosh, lots of wheels are turning right now.
Yeah, right, and
Yeah,
this is probably the most challenging because there's so much here, right? And this is
yep.
why there's a course. This
Yeah, I
is
was
why
gonna
I put
say.
together the course because it's too much to really talk about, and then the question becomes, okay, and I think this a lot of owners know what I'm talking about when you go to Google and it's like, "Yeah, but does that work for my horse?" Right? Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of general information about horses out there, but what's going to work for my horse? So whenever I'm teaching and whenever I'm putting things together, I really try to take you on a little bit of a journey there so you can make those decisions for yourself with the right information.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting thing right now because we're at this, or not all of us, but there is this shifting sort of narrative within horses. I think for a long time it was kind of, the way of, well, you just feed everybody the same thing for all time. And
Yes,
you know and oh, if they don't do well on that, well, that's not the feed's fault or whatever, right? And so it's this really changing time of,
yeah,
oh, okay, like I need to actually be specific about this and be educated about this
yes,
and, look at things specifically for my horse. And I know for myself, it was interesting because I do feed, I'm guilty. I feed like a formulated multi um, vitamin mineral, and it is a naturally sourced one, so it's not synthetic, but it's still a mix. And I was noticing with Raven, and I know this is not across the board, but she was growing in this like really red part of her coat, and I was like, well, crud, like is she
what's
getting
happening?
too much iron or is something going on? And so I started, doing some muscle testing and things, and I basically like backed off the mineral big time. um I think I like third gave her like a third of what I had been giving and upped some of the other nutrients that I had been giving her. And the red just like completely went away. And I was like, huh, like,
Yeah,
it was that quick. It was
it's
maybe
that
within
quick.
a week, right?
Yes,
And and so I thought, okay, like this stuff is really making a difference
right.
in her system, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and horses are so transparent. I think that's why I love working with them so much. Like it's just so easy. Like they're just so clear.
Yep. Totally.
When something works
Yeah.
for them, you just know it. And you'd almost think it's a miracle when you start, like just one nutrient could do that. Like it completely turned my horse around.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so they're big animals. They have high requirements and we ask a lot of them too, you know?
Totally. Yep.
So they need that extra support, and sometimes they don't always get it, even though you have a balanced multi there, and you're doing everything right. Sometimes every horse has a unique profile, and they just need more. They just need more, and so um, finding out what that is will be a game changer. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and if you have an unwell horse, something's not working. You know?
Yeah.
So let's do something else. That's kind of my motto.
Mhm.
Because often when I put together programs for people, they're like, "Well, should I take them off all this stuff that I'm already on?" And I'm
Yep.
like, "Yes, because it's not working." You know?
Yep. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, there, it's also so, um, encouraging to know that and I see this with some of my clients is like there's these spaces for improvement. Um, there's always something that you can kind of work with, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And that's really actually very exciting to know,
Yes,
right?
and it's
Mhm.
inspiring for people, and one word that comes up, all the time from students that have taken the MS course in my bigger program, once they are, equipped with information and knowledge, is empowerment.
Mm, mm,
You're empowered to make decisions for your horse because you have the knowledge now, and then to see it just work and turn your horse around, there's just nothing better, than seeing that, so that's amazing. And I think too, like and I've talked about this before. I think we talked about it in our last podcast as well, about we're a little bit far behind in the horse world compared to where
yeah,
humans are at, right? We're not, the clinical testing just isn't there. We don't have the same data and information as we do for humans. But you can still apply a lot of what we know in the natural health industry for humans to horses. And so I think there's a lot of tools. Well, I know there's a lot of tools out there that you're just not going to find when you're searching.
Mhm.
And one of those is plants.
Yeah.
That's just not a mainstream practice that we're incorporating into our horses' health programs, and it's a must. They are vegan. They're plant-based animals. They need to be eating plants, and if they could, they'd find what they need. But they don't have that opportunity, so we have to
Yep.
provide it for them. So there's lots of plants. So that's more into the natural remedies
Yep.
step, is finding those plants to really support their system however they need it. And
Mm.
same with homeopathic remedies. So there's a lot of tools out there that we can be using to help restore balance. And it's just about getting the information and knowledge out there. That's it.
Yeah. I love watching Raven is a browser,
Oh,
um,
yeah.
and Diva has not been classically, and Raven's been teaching her about, try this, what about this?"
Oh,
So
you
they
eat it
eat
first,
stuff.
right?
Oh my gosh, they eat things. I'm like, "Why are you eating that? Like, you shouldn't
Yeah.
be eating that." But for them, that forage, that reaching up, like trying different things.
Oh,
Raven's
yeah.
been better for my blackberries than any horse ever because she just is like, "Ooh, these are fun to nibble." Like, she just,
Yeah.
keeps my blackberries back, and yeah, it's just really cool to see them making those choices. I'll throw willow branches in for them, just to give them different things to do and eat and in their
Yeah.
system, right?
Yeah. And one
Yeah.
thing our horses really go after is the raspberry leaves.
Yeah,
And
totally.
for those of you who might know raspberry leaf, but it's awesome for hormones. So it's really good for
Yep.
mares and but the geldings are eating it too.
Yep. Yep,
So
for sure.
yeah,
For
and
sure.
you
And
just
I
have to
some
trust them
Yep,
that they
you gotta
know.
trust them.
Yeah.
It's hard
I
sometimes,
know.
right? Yeah,
Totally. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. But I love that. So this type of these herbal nutrients that can actually bring yeah, a lot of healing for our horses. So do you want to get
Yes.
into we only have like it's like I don't know, 8 minutes left,
I
Alicia.
know, it just zips right by. We can talk forever. I think we established that last time. We could be sitting here till tomorrow.
Completely. Yes. So we love you, as we come closer towards a close, like love you to share a little bit more about these last pieces.
With the plants?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I think all horses should be on plants. I mentioned that. I think
Yep.
plants should be a part of all natural health programs for horses. There's a lot of different plants out there. And when I say plants, I'm talking about herbs because I can't say, okay, go feed your horse this and the pasture's just not going to have it. We're just not,
Yeah.
they don't have the freedom to go find what they need. But there's a lot of medicinal plants that are very consistent with the human industry as well, right?
Yeah.
So all the things we talk about for humans can certainly be applied for horses. And what I find interesting and also a little bit shocking as to why we're not using them more is that, the majority of our pharmaceutical drugs come from plants.
Yeah.
That's
Totally.
actually a fact, right? It's the truth. And so, but of course, in the pharmaceutical industry, they're trying to pull out that active ingredient, whatever that ingredient is that has the properties they're looking for, and then they scale them up. And this is why it throws Mother Nature right out of balance, and then you end up with all these unwanted side effects. Right. So a lot of these plants have really powerful compounds in them, like a lot of the corticosteroid and that class of molecules are
Mm.
amazing for health. It helps rejuvenate, restore, helps with inflammation, it helps detoxify the body, good for digestion.
Yep.
And even though we try to put them in little boxes and say, okay, this plant is just going to be good for this, you can't really say that. If it's good for one thing, it's good for the whole body, and that's part of the holistic approach, right?
Yep.
We are using plants that are just going to help restore, and a lot of those plants also have nutrients in them too. So it's just another way of getting nutrients into them in a more
Mm,
bioavailable sense, right? So,
mm,
and even single vitamins and minerals, we are in that position in the horse world and for ourselves because we don't have the food available to us to get the nutrition we need. And I mean, essentially, that's it. So we have to come up with innovative ways to get those nutrients, and so that's where you end up with vitamins and minerals in single form, right?
mhm, mhm,
Ideally, they all come from natural substances, right? That's where they come from originally. And so the other thing I love about plants is, and this science can never really explain this, but if you're an energy worker, you'll get it, is
mhm,
that all the plant constituents work in synergy. So if
mhm.
you take one compound out of a plant or take one constituent out of the plant and try and get the same effect as you would with the whole plant, you're never going to get it.
Yeah.
The plant works better when it's in whole form, when all of those constituents are working together. And that's, I think, really, really important because as somebody that does a lot of energy healing and energy work, you will certainly appreciate that it's not just about identifying the constituent. It's about all the energetic dynamics that go on inside a living, breathing plant, right?
Mhm,
That
mhm.
they're living things. So, I
Yes.
had a I can't remember if I mentioned this to you before, but I was listening to this medical doctor. I was learning quite a bit from him, and he was saying one of the reasons why plants are so effective for addressing chronic health conditions is that they are carriers of light, right? They take in
Mm, yeah,
sunlight and then they
totally,
just transfer it into the
totally,
body. Well, there's nobody that understands that better than horses because they live outside. That's what they do
completely,
is eat plants that
totally.
have sunlight on them. So I think that's really, really amazing too. So there's a lot of different plants you can use to support the horse. It just depends on the horse. But really what you're trying to choose here are plants that support the
Mm,
endocrine system,
mhm.
support the digestive system. And if you suspect that there's some toxicity there, you can also choose some for detoxification, for
Yeah,
example. And
totally.
you can even choose some for the hooves, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of single plants that are just good for inflammation and circulation
Yep.
and all of those things as well.
I know I've been having a lot of fun playing with it for Raven because I know she likes plants so much.
Yes. Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
so, she gets turmeric and slippery elm, and
Yes.
she loves white willow bark, as I was
So
saying.
there's a natural anti-inflammatory,
And yeah,
right? That's
it's
where aspirin comes
fabulous.
from. Yeah.
Totally, yeah, and so, and that's why I throw them the willow branches as well, and, yeah, and she just loves that stuff.
Yeah.
She just, always asking for different things in her feed, and it's really cool to connect with, like, okay, well, what are the living things? And I've actually created a little, like, horsey herb garden, and it's
Oh,
it's
awesome.
kinda it's kinda neat because now that it's throwing seeds into my horse paddocks, and so I'm getting, like, mullein coming up
Oh,
and
awesome.
right,
Yeah.
burdock and different things, and, I know a lot of people go into their horse paddocks like, "I don't want any of these plants in here," but it's like, they will pick and choose as
They
long as there's
will.
other things there
Yep.
that they can eat, like, keep the stinging nettle, keep the
Yes,
like, these things,
exactly.
right?
And just having like, for them, having variety is just so
Yep,
important, so
yep,
that they get to pick and choose and it will reduce your workload, right? It'll reduce you
totally.
having to provide them for them.
Yep, yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, it's so fun to watch them too.
Oh, yeah, it
Um,
is. I was working on a horse yesterday and, just going through exactly what we talked about today, but, we are muscle testing and going through and formulating the whole program for this horse and when you get really sort of in tune with a lot of these substances, you just know what
yep,
works for that horse. The vibration just is such a perfect match, and with this
totally.
horse, I knew the spirulina was coming, and I had it
Oh,
in my
yeah.
hand, and out of the 50 samples I was testing, the Spire, she turned around and tried to put her lips around it, so I knew
Yep,
that was a hit, right? They
yep,
know, they read the energy off of it before we can even know what's
totally.
going on, yet.
That's the other one that Raven loves,
Yeah.
spirulina.
It's so good, right? It's so
So
healthy
good.
for them, yep.
And wish she would go to the beach and just eat the seaweed
Yes.
on the
Yeah.
beach. Yeah,
Yeah.
you just just loved it, and it's so neat. I just did a 3-day, live stream dissection, and
Oh,
they were talking a lot about passive physio.
yeah.
So the idea of browsing being so healthy, the horses being able to reach up and grab things in
Mhm.
trees, and so good for their musculature and their overall physical balance. I was like, "That's really cool." So it's like
Yeah,
kind of this, yeah, 2 great things that are happening for them, just
totally.
getting
Yeah,
something interesting to eat that's really good for them, and also, like, getting this passive physio, that's building their muscles in good ways, and yeah, so I was like,
awesome.
"Cool. Very cool." That's amazing. Thank you so much. Is there
You're welcome.
anything that you wanna say to complete here today, about the metabolic syndromes or
We talked about a lot. I
Yeah,
think that
really
gives
went
people
through
a
it.
really good idea of sort of what the holistic approach
Yeah,
means, if they're gonna take the holistic approach, and it doesn't matter if your horse is on medication or you're wondering, can I get him off medication and all of that, that you have to work with your vet on that. But there's always a place for diet and nutrition. You
yep,
can never go wrong with adding more nutrition into your horse. They will become stronger, they'll be more resilient, and then maybe you want to revisit your decisions about the medication at some
yep,
point if you start to get a lot of improvement, because I know that's a very common question for people is, okay, so can I do this or this? Why not
yep,
do it together? And when your horse is ready and stronger, maybe then you can sort of reassess what you want to do, how you want to move forward. But
love
it's
it.
always, I think, you'll appreciate that it's always a commitment on behalf of the horse owner. If you want to, take the holistic approach, and you got to put in the commitment and the time, and really stay with it for a little while. And often those horses become lower maintenance because of it. You're adding years to their life, so they become stronger, and sort of that babysitting doesn't have to happen forever. It's
Yep.
just to get them back on their feet.
I love that. Thank you. So
Yes, you're
how
welcome.
do people get in touch? How do they find your course?
Well, you can go to elishaedwards.com,
Mhm.
Elisha Edwards.com, and you'll find Resolving EMS Naturally in the top menu bar under the online training. So you can find me there. I do have a webinar running every day, and I'm wondering, I don't know if you can send the listeners the link.
Yeah,
Or,
what I'll
okay.
do is I'll put it at under this episode at wholehorse.ca. So if you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, you can head over to wholehorse.ca. I believe this is episode 65 today. So,
Okay, awesome. Yes,
mhm.
congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you.
So, yeah, so with that webinar, you can sign up. I'm just gonna keep running it daily because everybody's always asking for it. And
Yep,
so if you just sign up to that, there is a bonus at the end for you too for listening. So, yeah,
fantastic.
and we talk about a lot of the things we talked about today. I just go in a little bit more in depth about a few things, but yeah, you should probably really enjoy that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alicia. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and I can't wait to come back.
Wow, we still have our flower essence
Yes,
one to do,
we have
so
we're gonna be busy.
we're gonna be busy. I really, really appreciate your time,
Yes.
and thanks everyone for tuning in today. I hope you learned something. I know I did. And we'll see you very soon for another episode. Bye for now.